We often see art in our lives as an enrichment, and I don't like that word. Enrichment always seems like a luxury, just something that we don't usually have in our lives. I think art is an essential part of our lives.
Art, I think, is really crucial to a campus environment. Think about walking through Washington Hall or Tucker Hall. I feel like those are such crucial buildings where art on campus really is very seen and very prevalent.
So the museums at W&L offer a wide variety of opportunities to the community at large, to the staff, to the students, to the faculty. We offer opportunities to relax, to learn outside of the classroom, to just enjoy. We advance learning through direct engagement with our objects, through hands-on experiences, and we facilitate an interdisciplinary approach to arts, to culture, to history, and we throw in the sciences as well.
I think art is essential to the W&L experience. A parent, when she was leaving our parents' family weekend tea about 2 weeks ago, just said out loud, "This is what the liberal arts is all about." And that comment really has stayed with me since then. I think she's right.
I'm an econ major and a poverty studies, law, justice, and society minor. And so this is my first foray into kind of just art in general. And I didn't know that I would enjoy it this much. And so I can't say that I see myself having a future in museum curatorial work, but at the same time, this has very much inspired me to be bold in whatever I do and not to be afraid to speak about the things that are affecting me.
I think people should really know that museums are open. You can come into it anytime if you want to walk through. It's an incredible opportunity to see what people are doing, how people are thinking. Any programs that they put on, they're amazing. And so if you ever find yourself passing by, please come in.
Can everybody hear me okay? We're going. Which one? This guy? The room. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and encourage everyone to sort of get your treats and start finding your seat. We'll get started in just a moment, so we'll give everybody just a few more minutes to grab some nibbles. Where's Rachel? Sure. Alrighty, why don't we go ahead and get started. My name is Nayeli Guillen. I'm the Associate Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Art Museum and Galleries here at Washington and Lee. On behalf of the entire team, we want to thank you all who are here with us in person, and to those of you who are joining us virtually for this final event of our programmatic season, welcome. We're thrilled to have Mr. William R. Sargent with us tonight to help celebrate the close of Long Time No See and to share his deep knowledge of the history of Chinese export porcelain. Bill was for 32 years the curator at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, so he has a great deal to share with us today. Before we dive in, just a few additional thank yous to make. As many of you know, we have had an incredible year with Long Time No See. This exhibition opened in late August 2024, the culmination of the Art Museum's first inaugural art residency. Visual artist Stephanie Shih came to WNL to examine and consider our world-renowned collection of Chinese export porcelain, translating her observations and research into a new photographic still life series with those ceramics here at WNL at their heart. Through her vision, creativity, and collaborative spirit, Stephanie helped mold this unforgettable project and exhibition. And we cannot thank Stephanie enough on embarking on this project with us, although we'll continue trying to do so. And we are incredibly privileged that the artwork she created here at WNL during her residency is going to be staying as part of our permanent collection. We also want to extend our sincere thanks to the Terra Foundation for American Art for the grant they awarded to the art museums to support the development of the Long Time No See exhibition that's currently in the Reeves. Just some quick run of show logistics for you all. The lecture portion of our evening is obviously here in the space, so congrats everybody for making it here. Please continue throughout this portion to enjoy the food that we have available. The Long Time No See project also involved the creation of a beautiful illustrated catalog, which is still available for sale. You can see one kind of towards the back there. So we encourage you to seek that out through our bookstore if you haven't purchased it yet. And then following the talk, we'll have time for some Q&A with Bill. And then we invite you all to join us in the Reeves Museum of Ceramics for refreshments and to enjoy the exhibition. To introduce our speaker, please join me in welcoming Rachel Du. An essential contributor to the Long Time No See exhibition and catalog, Rachel currently serves as our visiting curator of Asian art and was essential in bringing Bill back to WNL for this event.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rachel Du. So I was on the curatorial committee of Long Time No See, and I was also lucky enough to be invited as a catalog contributor for the Associated Catalog. And through this project, I also became a curatorial lead on Points of Exchange, which you will see in the galleries across from us here. So I'd like to welcome everyone here for gathering to celebrate the closing of Long Time No See, which opened actually end of August in 2024. I first learned about the Reeves collection through Stephanie when we met 2 years ago for the first time to discuss this project. And during our discussion, I immediately recommended Bill's book, Treasures of Chinese Export Ceramics, which was published by the Peabody Essex Museum in 2012, which is considered by myself and many others in the field the authoritative text on Chinese export porcelain. And thanks to the generosity of the museums at WNL, I have been able to deepen my knowledge of export porcelain in the last 2 years, which culminated in points of exchange that you can see across from in the galleries across. And Points of Exchange also opened concurrently with Long Time No See. So in a way, they are sister projects. And Bill, has been a really indispensable resource in my journey in learning about export ceramics, whether he is aware of it or not. His deep knowledge has significantly shaped the development of both Long Time No See and Points of Exchange. So today feels like a full circle moment where we can bring Bill and Stephanie together to celebrate the culmination of a remarkable project. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Bill Sargent.
Thank you, Nayeli and Rachel, for that gracious introduction. Coming full circle, I want to say that I owe a great debt of gratitude to Reeves Collection and Jim Whitehead in particular for my last 47 years of being in this field. I was a curator in West by God, Virginia, and Huntington, at the Huntington Museum. I was there for 6 years, and I left, and I went back to Massachusetts with $400 in my pocket and no job. I don't recommend that to any of you students. Don't ever give up a job without another one. But I got interviewed by Crosby Forbes, who was the curator of the China Trade Museum, the founder and curator. And in the interview, I said, I don't know a thing about Chinese export, anything. And he said, that's okay, nobody else does either. And I said, the only thing I know is that we had at the Huntington, the Reeves Collection traveling around 1973 or 4. And he said, do you know Jim Whitehead? And I said, yeah, I know Jim. And he said, well, then you know more than anybody, you have the job. So thank you, Reeves, thank you, Jim. Now, I think I gave my first talk on ceramics in 1968, but I've been speaking about Chinese export ceramics and all decorative arts for 47 years now. And normally we talk about the ceramics. We show ceramics and we say what the period is and what the date is and what the decoration is, and this is not that talk. A lot of us like to walk around in museums and see a piece of ceramic in this case, or you could pick anything, a cashmere shawl perhaps or something, and go, oh, I know that's a cashmere shawl, I know that's a piece of ceramic. So I started collecting these images, and I now have 1,700 in my database. I'm not going to show you 1,700 tonight unless you insist. I have them all here on my computer. But I had them for a long time, and I thought, what can I do with these? So I looked through them, and I said, speak to me. What are you going to tell me about ceramics? And I ended up coming up with some categories I'll share with you. The first thing I want to do, though, is to say that there are many ways to look at ceramics. And I mean, you can look at the ceramics, you can research them through archival records, shipping records, invoices, wills and documents, and archaeology and marine archaeology. I mean, there's a myriad ways of doing this. There's a myriad ways of interpreting as well, like back into those themes. There are also a lot of poetic references to Chinese export ceramics. A lot of them are 18th century and quite humorous because they were kind of ridiculed at the time because women were buying too much, and so people were ridiculing their acquisitions. There are literary references, but those are hard to find unless you're actually reading the books. I'm going to quote from a couple of things, but that's not my focus either. The focus is in paintings and what paintings can tell us. So one of the earliest written records that refers to porcelain is in this book Itinerario of 1596, which displayed for the first time detailed maps of Asia to European people. And he wrote in that book, to tell of the porcelain made there is not to be believed, and those that are exported yearly to India, Portugal, and Nova Hispania and elsewhere, but the finest are not allowed outside the country on penalty of corporal punishment, but serve solely for the lords and governors of the country, and are so exquisite that no crystalline glass is to be compared with them. So just from that quote, you can get an idea that all this porcelain that we kind of take for granted now was considered in a much higher light at the time. Most of the objects, like I said, that we talk about are the porcelains themselves, and here's one at the Reeves collection, a crockware plate. But I'm not going to be talking about plates and plates and plates and pots and pots. I'm going to look at them in paintings and say, because a lot of people say to me, well, what was this used for? And I'll say, well, it was used to hold sausages. It was used to hold, I'm not sure, maybe butter, I think, because it's near the bread, so maybe it's used for butter. What do you want to use it for? That's the bottom line. So in looking at them to see what they said to me, I broke them into this category, and these are my musings on these particular things, so you might come at it and find a different category. But these are the 5 categories we're going to be discussing. Before we get into the European paintings, I have to acknowledge that some things that are often considered Asian export are seen in domestic Chinese paintings because they were made for the domestic market, not for export. But when Europeans arrived, they started just collecting them because they were so fascinated. One example is this elephant with a vase on its back, and you can see it on the table in to the right of the Qianlong Emperor. And it's this kind of thing that you will see in every export sale. And everybody embraces it as export, but they were not made for export, not initially anyway. But when Europeans came in and started buying them, then they said, oh, we got a buyer. So then they started making them like crazy. Same thing with this. This is actually an incense burner. And you can see it on a table and on a stand behind the shoulder of Hao Kuo, who was the greatest Hong merchant, the favorite of Americans. Crosby Forbes' ancestor was very close with Hao Kuo. But these were not, they were acquired because they were attractive and exotic, but they were used as butter dishes. We actually have records in Portuguese collections that they were used for butter dishes. Chinese export paintings are another source, although they're not domestic paintings. These were made for export. This was the last in a series of 24 views of the production of ceramics from the mining of the clay all the way to the end, where here you have the Western merchants going to a shop of Chinese porcelain, all export porcelain. And you can see all the plates on the shelf. But in the front are 2 dogs, flanked by 2 rooster cockerel figures, and in the middle a porcelain pagoda. So they do show up there. Treasures and allegories. In the 14th and 15th century, these were really rare acquisitions outside China. As you can imagine, shipping them or getting them anywhere was difficult. It was the Silk Road. They actually were transported. Like here you have a view of, a 15th century view of 15th century blue and white porcelain being transported on the Silk Road. And I would not trust it like that. It's an imaginative view. And on your left is a guy drinking from a kendi, which is a southeast western drinking vessel. And they drank from the spout, so they would just tip it up and drink out of it. So they appear in paintings like that. This is very few of these pieces made it to Europe. We're talking 15th century, 16th century. They made it, but I mean, we can count them on a couple of hands. One of them is the Celadon vase, which is now known as the Garnier Fonthill vase. And these were considered so precious that they were mounted in ormolu, in silver or gilt bronze or silver, often mounted with gemstones. And often they didn't have a use for a vase like this, so they would alter the function by putting a handle and a spout on it. And so they drill a hole in the side and make it into a pitcher. But this fantastic drawing of 1713 is a document. Nobody knows where the mounts went to or when they were taken off. And the vase is now in Ireland. And when we talk about, what were pieces made for and how were they ultimately used, this is a painting by Francesco Benaglio of the Virgin and Child, and you see a bowl in the front with pears in it. And if you're not of that culture and of that period, you might just say today, well, it's in a bowl and there's some pears, isn't that nice? But pears actually are a symbol to Italians in the 15th century of the Virgin and Child, so that's reinforcing a symbolism there. And the use of a Chinese piece of porcelain, to me, represents the value that's put on these very, very rare pieces. The bowl in China would be called a chicken heart bowl or a lotus seed bowl, and they were available in 3 sizes. The smallest was used as a tea bowl, but they were not used for that here. They were used for other functions. And it'd be a short step. Well, this one, the religious connotation here, this is Delodi's Christ washing the feet of the apostles from 1500. And he's not washing the feet of apostles in just some old bowl. This is a Chinese export bowl fit for Christ and his disciples. And the bowl is very similar to one in the British Museum there. They're very large, and getting this across the Silk Road would have been extraordinary, but there you have it. They did a few. One of the most famous paintings in Western art history is Bellini and Titian's Feast of the Gods. And here you have, some people say one man's religion is another man's mythology. Here's a mythological scene, but still it's got the same connotations as it does in the religious things, where it's magical, it's full of religious and spiritual meaning to them. And these would have been probably owned by wealthy people, would have had them in their house. They would have commissioned this painting. I want a painting of the Feast of the Gods, and use my porcelain. This is one of my favorite paintings, which I just found. It's in Sargent in Lisbon, and it's a series of paintings of the life of Francis Xavier. And this is one where, as it says, I think it says, the life was, he relieves the thirst of his traveling companions because they were dying of thirst. So here he is stepping off the boat onto the ocean, and he's walking on water, and he's pulling up, you see the blue and white vase, he's pulling up with salt water that he's turning into fresh water. And then on board, there's a close-up of the vase that's being pulled up, which is close to this martaban vase that you see on the right, with the lugs to use for ropes and so forth. And then the crockware cup, called the crow cup, because on the inside is a depiction of a bird. They were fairly common in the 17th century, but still very valued. So here's the sailor feeding the fresh water now to one of his companions in a crockware cup. When the crockware cup got to Europe, it was so valued that it was then mounted in Ormolu, as you see here, as a chalice or a wine glass. Sometimes they went crazy with porcelains, and this one, we decided, what do you call it? Pointers don't work. And I said I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it. But running over here, you see blue and white, blue and white, blue and white, blue and white, blue and white. It's blue and white, a whole bunch of it here. It's all over the place, part of the mythological scene. And down in the very corner is this wonderful jar that you see, another example of it from the Philippines. And symbols of abundance, this is my category, which it's really inspired by Dutch still life paintings, because that was the golden era of the Dutch trade. And everybody who was anybody had porcelain and then inspired or hired painters to paint still lifes for their houses using these Chinese export porcelains. This one is Osias Bert, the elder. And if you didn't have Osias Bert, you might get William Culf. He did a lot of paintings with China trade porcelain. And these are two magnificent pieces, similar, you see one similar in the RA collection, with a magic fountain. Nobody entirely knows, if anybody wants to research the magic fountain, go for it. Nobody has nailed that down, where that image came from. But again, you see these pieces have been mounted in Ormolu as well because of their value. And again, another crow cup, or crockware crow cup, mounted in silver gilt. And you can see one on the shelf in the painting by Jan Bruegel the Elder. And I have multiple paintings because it's kind of like the haystack thing, you know, you make one haystack and everybody wants one, so you do another one, another one, another one, another one. The same thing happened with Jan Bruegel, that everybody wanted one of these pieces. So you see different layouts, but the same pieces. And so whether they were his or whether he made sketches of special pieces and then added them in at different places, I don't know, but they did use them. I didn't mention, but we use paintings as a way of dating some pieces. It's not always, I was wondering where that knocking was coming from. Thank you. I was thinking, somebody's very rude over there. Very, very nervous. I was told, I said, how long should I speak? And I was told, well, judge the audience. So if I see anybody going like this, I'll know when to stop, okay? This is a painting of 1627, and this is the golden age of Dutch life. So they've got the tulips, they've got the seashells from the travels that they were doing around the world. They were collecting seashells. And in the corner you see two pots. There's a detail on the right. And then the Dutch weren't the only ones who had them. You know, here we have one from Jamestown, and you have one here. So these are all, to me, important evidence of the admiration that people had for these. This is one of my favorite paintings because it's got three magnificent pieces of export porcelain. And it's got the most unusual design. The piece on the right is a plate in our collection. And I'll brag here because nobody knew where this was for or from. I said it has to be Macau, St. Paul's in Macau, because the seven-headed hydra here has two human heads. There are no other images of seven-headed hydras with human heads except on the facade of St. Paul's. So I went to St. Paul's. I went around. I went to the Monte Fort, which is the museum up on the hill. I said, do you have any shards of this? Yes, we do. And it was from the Augustinian Church, so bingo. Again, they're mounted. Oh, and one other interesting thing. This is a mystery to us because that bowl is now in London. There is a Persian copy. How did that bowl, did it travel through Persia and get copied and keep going to, we don't know. But that's one of the interesting things. This is a point on interpretation because this is a piece at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and the label online talks not about the lobster, the crab, and everything else. These are all valuable commodities that people with money could afford, the cheeses, the linens, and everything else. They talk about the imagery on the cloth there, which is a religious imagery, and they talk about that's what this is all about. They don't talk anything about the 4 pieces of Chinese export porcelain, which I think is a huge mistake, but then I have a bias. This is Jan van Kessel's painting of Africa, and I'm amused by this because the porcelain is just kind of scattered around. It's not special, it's not central. They're piled up, they're kind of crazy, you might break them that way. So the question to me then is, if this is 1666, the heyday was 1620 to 1640. So now is the heyday over for crockware, and so they can treat it casually? I don't know. In terms of one thing, I have notes, but I'm kind of ignoring to my peril. Because I wanted to say with that little cup that you have here that was also found in Jamestown, we know that by 1615 more than 44,000 examples were exported to the Netherlands, and by 1619 officials in Amsterdam asked their agents not to send anymore because, quote, the country is full of them. This is another one of my favorites, which is at the Currier Museum in Manchester, New Hampshire. And it's a family portrait, but it's done in the conceit of a theatrical scene of Antony and Cleopatra. And it's this famous story where they bet each other that they could make a more expensive meal than the other one. And it's the husband and wife. The artist is the guy, and his wife is the woman, playing Antony and Cleopatra. And at the end of the meal, to prove that she had more money than he did, she took off her huge pearl earring and crushed it in that bowl, and then drank the pearl, so to prove that she could do a more expensive meal. And I said that, you know, there was a period of ridicule in the 18th century with poetry, but this is a painting that is against the luxury of the time. It's a Dutch painting by an unknown artist, but nature has destroyed the wealth that you have collected, basically. The deer has come in, knocked the side table over, all the crockware is smashed on the floor, the silver gilt is smashed on the floor. So the artist is making fun there of that. Now, collecting and display, the Dutch were really the first to sort of get this going, because the Portuguese were the first to establish a sea route, then the Dutch, capturing 2 Portuguese ships, took it over, and everybody collected, and they just amassed things. So here you have a rich burgher's house, and you have what's called a crock shelf, and that's where they put all their crockware. And they did it for display. They didn't take it down and eat off it necessarily, it was for display. It also extended to dollhouses. This is a dollhouse of 1680. I gave a talk in Singapore, and the archaeologist from Mexico had found a small jar, and he said it was a miniature snuff bottle. And I had to go up to him later, and I said, no, it's actually a dollhouse bottle. And I sent him this picture, so he was very happy. The very wealthy would, of course, go overboard with their installations. And the lower image on the left is one wall of Charlottenburg Palace, which you can visit today. It's restored, but it's restored beautifully. And you can see that the porcelain is up the walls, across the ceiling. It's everywhere you can look. And then I have a detail of the mantle with vases in the back, and then in the front are wine pots in the shape of animals, such as the ones you see over there. So the wealthy, the 1%, went crazy. They had huge porcelain rooms. They would sometimes, at Charlottenburg, you will see one room where all the walls are glass, and then the porcelain is front, so it looked like you had twice as much as you're actually looking at. One of my favorite artists is Mary Ellen Best, who traveled throughout Europe and did small watercolors. And this is one she did of the collection of Augustus the Strong in Dresden. And this is a great document for us to see what he had, where he had it, how he displayed it. And it's also a great document because they did a reinstallation. So on the left here, you have Mary Ellen Best's view in 1839 of the De Roy porcelain figures, and then they did a redisplay of it, copying Mary Ellen Best. That's the only way they're going to know. One of the strangest paintings of the 18th century is not a room full of porcelain or an entire collection of De Roy or anything, but it's this strange cabinet with one of everything. There's an I Ching teapot in the front, there's De Roy figure in the middle, there's Celadon, there's one of everything. Nobody knows who did this, it's just called French School. But in the middle of that is a covered pot that's very similar in period and shape and function to the one you have at the Rees collection. But that one, again, has been mounted with a handle, and the one you have would have had a lid. So it would have looked more like the one on the left, but they changed the function. Sea captains were not necessarily the wealthiest people, but they traveled, they collected. They collected for themselves, and they would collect. I come from Salem, which was a ship sailing area, and not all, but a lot of the sea captains had little stores. So they were allowed to bring home stuff for themselves, which they would then sell in the stores. So here's a ship captain with a map of Asia, and on the floor is a large Chinese porcelain vase. What you see behind him are two clay figures in glass domes, and one of them is exactly like the one in the Peabody Essex Museum of the Monk. Cornelius Truce did this wonderful painting. Again, this is in the Rijksmuseum. It's a fantastic painting, but the Rijksmuseum in their write-up say that the artist and the subject both shared a love of theater because the books on the shelves are all related to theater. They don't say a word about the clay figures on top of the lacquer box or the cockerel there. That's all Asian. So obviously, the sitter loved Asian material too. And this is another one of my favorites. I have many favorites. I have 1,700 favorites. This fellow, I got to get this right. He was commander-in-chief of France's Swiss Guards at the outset of the French Revolution and became a well-known art collector. And this is long after the French Revolution, long after his career in the military. And I think of him sitting there dreaming about the days when he was collecting the stuff that he's looking at on the shelf, these ormolu mounted celadons. And then behind him, across his shoulder, are more Japanese pieces as well. Everyone collected then who had money. These ormolu mounts were actually added quite regularly to, and this is another thing, if anyone wants to research this, I'm done. But if anybody wants to research why pieces that were mounted in ormolu in the mid-18th century are almost exclusively Chinese domestic pieces and not export pieces, I'd like an answer for that. By that time, you see the, dreaming of past glories. The Chinese material had fell out of favor. In the late 18th century, everybody was doing the Grand Tour. They had turned towards Rome, to Italy, to Greece. They were collecting Greek and Roman stuff. The Chinese stuff was pushed to back rooms, to attics. And here is a watercolor of the Chinese room at the Royal Palace in Berlin from 1850. Now, I just said, these things were pushed to the back. But according to the information about this, the room was, quote, about to be abandoned to dust and dereliction. So it had outlived its time as a Chinese room. Most great houses had rooms like this, where they had Chinese wallpaper, lacquer, porcelain, everything, and they would display it all. But tastes change, and it all got pushed away. And it got pushed into cabinets, corner cabinets, like this one. And Mary Ellen Best, my favorite, back again for another look. The corner cabinet, nothing's on the shelves, nothing's on the mantle. They're pushed into the cabinets. And this one in the Shelburne is another favorite where, there's this sweet old lady with her porcelain from bygone years. And on the very bottom is, I don't know if you can see it entirely in the detail, is a Chinese export porcelain coffee set. And he's looking at one of the cups and examining the base. Now, drinking and dining. And the drinking and dining is important because tea, coffee, chocolate, punch were all things outside Europe that were brought in by global trade. So here you have tea is the most important, and you have a Doha teapot, you have Chinese pieces. Yixing was considered the best pot of red clay for serving tea, and here you have what's called a conversation piece. If you were wealthy family, you had your portrait done around a tea table, and that was called the conversation piece. And invariably, you had Chinese porcelain cups, maybe an Yixing teapot. The youngest daughter was trained to be the gracious hostess. So this was all status. This is a piece exactly like what you see in the painting. And one of the interesting things about this is not the only one like this or this kind of function, but you see a lion, and he's facing a ball that rotates on a pipe. And the idea is that when steam came out of the lion's mouth, it would rotate the ball. we've never poured boiling water into these things, so I don't know. And I don't recommend it. This is a piece in the Reeves collection that I'm including because most I Ching ware is red stoneware, but it's not always. It's buff colored. There are many other colors. And it not only was the great houses of Europe and America and New Spain and everywhere else that had porcelain, but even a folk painting from Connecticut. You have a portrait of a young man drinking tea from a Chinese Amari tea bowl. What's interesting is he's drinking it correctly from the bottom. Americans couldn't figure out how to drink from, or Europeans couldn't figure out because they would burn their fingers. You're supposed to hold it like this. So that's when they started asking for handles to be added. I might be running out of time, so I'm not going to read, but there's a great story from the House of Seven Gables about a tea set like this. By this time, it had become more popular. You can see it casually on a very inexpensive tray. No silver gilt mounts or anything here. Chocolate, of course, was from the New World, from New Spain. And so obviously most of the paintings that show drinking of chocolate would be Spanish, although here's one from France. Again, this points out that these drinks were expensive. And these were not for you and me. Well, maybe you, but not me. And I couldn't dress like that. I couldn't have afforded a coffee cup like that at the time. My favorite is this because it's the only painting I've found that shows anyone drinking from a Chinese export porcelain mug. Of about 1690, which is a great thing. Punch was something from Southeast Asia that became the drink for sailors, ship captains and sailors. So most men's clubs would have punch. And this painting of Sir Boucher Ray is on board ship. So he had his punch bowl on board ship, and it's lurching. And I'm not sure if he's trying to save the punch or trying to save the bowl or both, but he is saving that. And this is one of your punch bowls, which is a very small one. It's only 7 inches, almost 8 inches in diameter. Well, that's called a sneaker, and you drink right out of it directly. And here's this painting of Joseph Highmore, by Joseph Highmore, showing a man about to drink right out of that small sneaker, out of the... This painting on the left came up at auction a few years ago, and I wish I could have afforded it. I think it's such a wonderful painting. And it shows a mother and daughter having coffee. I'm not sure she's young enough to have coffee, but or old enough to have coffee. But the decoration on it is the New York State coat of arms, which you have an example of in the museum. And porcelain is props, which is the last category. There comes a time when I said all of these things were pushed to the side. And so they were no longer the center. So there's 2 Chinese export porcelain pieces here, and I wonder if you can find them. Yes, at the upper left. They're just sitting on a high upper shelf. I mentioned to somebody, I was talking about swan tureens and goosehead tureens and everything else. And that's where this swan tureen, or swan meat pie comes from. The tureens devolved from that. But it's stuck up in the corner, and this is another kendi like you saw in that early painting. Everybody knows Francois Boucher. This is a picture of his wife with a few Chinese pieces on a shelf. And these pieces keep showing up in his paintings, so they're obviously his, which he did. This is a nice painting by Jan van Oos, and I include it because not only is the porcelain no longer the center, it's pushed off to the side, but the piece has been decorated, over-decorated in Europe, which is the only painting I've ever found that depicts that, which is actually a common thing, but you don't see it in paintings. They show up in American paintings like James Peale and his brother Raphael. Joseph Blackburn painted this portrait of Anne Phillips with a vase, Chinese export vase. I don't know if that's the only piece she has or whatever, but everybody knows McNeill Whistler's Purple and Rose with pots as props. They're props. And this is another one that's a prop. It's not the center, but it is being held upright. She would just used it to feed the pigeons. So, it's not like it's an important piece with ormolu mounts. It's just something she used to feed the pigeons. But the arms are set upright. So, and here's a similar piece from a similar period in the Reeves collection. So somehow or other, he was at least nodding towards the fact that this was an important piece. And John Singer Sargent's, you all probably know his painting of the Boyd daughters with his two large Japanese vases, but we're talking about Chinese. So I include this one, the Wertheimers, with a large Chinese vase in the back as a prop, and she's just resting her hand on it nicely. My favorite is William McGregor Paxton, who did a series of attractive women. Here's the maid who's feather dusting but stopped to look at something. And this from the Reeves collection as well. A very ordinary piece, impossible to date. They were made past the 1930s when you could buy them at Shreve, Crump and Lowe in Boston. But here is an advertisement that shows similar pieces on the wall. And of course, I had to include Louise Herreshoff, Ames Eaton Reeves. She was painted under the name of Eaton second, Herreshoff first, and then gave up painting. But this one in particular, I forgot what the title of the show was called, but it was something like Color and whatever. So the porcelain isn't the point, the color is the point. But that is obviously a Jardiniere, a yellow glazed Chinese Jardiniere, maybe Japanese, but probably Chinese. How are people going to recognize or investigate porcelain going forward? Because we don't do still life paintings, we don't do interior paintings of corner cupboards or anything. We're going to be stuck with photographs of collections in situ, like this. But to continue with props, there are lots of things that could be investigated, and I don't have time for it today or in my life, but movies is one of them. So here's one with Grace Kelly with Dial M for Murder, which has a 1780 Dehois figure on the mantle. On the other side is Christopher and His Kind, which was a movie 2011 with an octagonal plate exactly like one that belonged to Jonathan Sayward in York, Maine. These people didn't know what they had. They were just props, and they literally used them as props in paintings. This is my nightmare prop, which is from the movie Cloud Atlas. I watched this I keep my phone with me when I'm watching movies, and I go, click, take pictures. And this, I had to rewind and take a few pictures to get the right one. I don't even remember what this is about, but it's porcelain flying around, turning into shards. So what do contemporary artists do? Well, I have one friend, Diane Chen, who uses shards from shipwrecks or clumsy collectors. It happens. And she does transfer print on stuff. And what she does here is she's got letters from a ship captain and his wife, so you can sit and read the letters back and forth. And then, of course, your own Stephanie Shih, which I'm not going to talk about because I know you have all taken classes with her, you've seen the exhibition, you'll see more. I'm happy that I'm here to help celebrate that exhibition as well. I'm going to leave with one last painting and a contemporary poetic reference. Billy Collins, if some of you I hope know, he's a pretty good poet. In his poem Metropolis, is meandering through a museum, it's the Metropolitan, and admiring paintings. He says he doesn't want bronze sculptures, he wants paintings, particularly of still lifes. And he concludes with, the one that sends me out the door returns me humming like a gyroscope to the rain and the madhouse outcries of the streets is still life with wild strawberries in a Wanli bowl. Thank you.
So we have some time left left over for any questions, sort of burning thoughts for Bill. We have one staff member who's walking around with a microphone. We'll ask that you ask your question into the mic so our friends digitally can hear that as well.
I heard once that English people put milk in their teacups first because they were worried when tea was brought to London from Portugal that the boiling water would break the teacup. So they put in milk first to lower the temperature. Is that true?
I never heard that before. 47 years in the business, and I never heard that story.
That's
No,
how they-
I would have to track that down because it's
It's a dumb.
I have a story I'll share with you later because I don't want to take up the time, but it's also about putting something, it's about heat in porcelain. Porcelain was fired to like 1200 degrees, so there's no way boiling water is going to do anything to
But you didn't
porcelain.
whisk it in the teapot.
Yeah, you did.
No.
Oh, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it now. No. You know, you don't do that to museum artifacts, so, no. They wouldn't allow that. I wouldn't allow it. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask a question which could lead to a 10-hour lecture, and you don't have 10 hours.
I do. My plane doesn't leave till.
I do too. And that is, can you comment about the relationship of the Chinese export porcelain and the Japanese export porcelain and the Dutch paintings and the emergence of the Dutch ceramic imitations of that then also start showing up in the art period? I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that.
Okay. Are you going to be around for the reception?
I
All right, we'll do it. I was asked about Chinese and Japanese and Dutch and the influence in the period, and that is a huge, huge, huge topic. I will say that we got everything from China. When the fall of the Ming Dynasty happened in 1644, the kilns were shut down. So then the merchants went to Japan and got porcelain from Japan. And one of the ones they got was called Amari from the port of Amari because of the port of Amari being shipped out. And then when the kilns reopened later in the 17th century, they went back to China because China had a much better, as they kind of do now, for economics. They had cheap labor, they had all the kilns, they had all the material. Japan couldn't compete with the numbers. So the merchants went back to China and they said, we're now used to Amari. So that's where Chinese Amari comes from because the Chinese potters started making copies of the Japanese. So everything was in flux going back and forth. And the same thing happened when everything reached Europe, everyone wanted to copy it. And the Chinese were not allowing anyone into China, like you were not allowed to go to Jingdazhen, where the porcelain is made, to see how it was made. And people would sneak in and they'd sneak out with something and they thought they had the secret and they didn't. So it took until 1718 or 19 for Meissen to discover secondhand the secret, which is not only the material but the high firing temperature. And then everything was let loose with the copies. Copies and fakes is one of my favorite subjects. So, yeah. Yes.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I have a question about the Dutch still life paintings from the Golden Age, in particular, thank you. Vanitas paintings, because most of the paintings that you show are vanitas that like shows the futility of life and like how transient the things are. I was wondering if the porcelain here represents more like the material that endures time rather than thing that represents a status. Because most of the stuff in those paintings are like broken or the glasses are shattered and stuff, but like most porcelain stuff are like intact.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I was like wondering your
It's an interesting question about vanitas paintings. And it's interesting you bring that up because I don't think I have a vanitas painting here. Vanitas almost always has a skull, an hourglass, other instruments like a broken violin. They'll have a lot of imagery that talks about that. Death is one of my favorite subjects. The Dia de los Muertos is dear to my heart. I have my altar out every year. I've been to Oaxaca twice for Day of the Dead. But I can't recall. I'm going to look for Vanitas, particularly for Vanitas paintings, to see if there's any porcelain in them. And I'll bet if there is, it's broken. Yeah. I have a question back here.
Yeah, just getting into the weeds. When you talked about the doll houses, are we talking about doll houses the size of what we would think of today, or are they something larger?
They're actually pretty large. They're about as big as this table and about this high.
So more or less what we would think of as doll houses?
Yeah. They're very grand. There aren't very many from the 17th century, but there are a half a dozen anyway that I can think of. And they all have a porcelain room, because everybody had a porcelain room. So, yeah. And that little piece that I said was found in, the shipwreck in Mexico, that was bound for a dollhouse somewhere. Any other questions here? Ready to go for the reception, and more questions over there. Happy to do it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all again so much for joining us. There are still some nibbles here. They're only here, so please take advantage of the food that is here in CGL, and please join us over at the Reeves where we have additional refreshments, and we will have Bill, and we will have Stephanie, and we will have Rachel, and we will have Dr. Yu to look at the show and points of exchange and sort of enjoy the Reeves with us today. Thank you so much.